Thank you, Maurice. Hi, everybody. My name is Martin Macmillian. I'm the CEO of Pollen VC, based in London. We're going to talk about a time-based metric to measure UA performance today. It's a little introduction to who we are as a company. So our business is providing credit facilities to gaming studios and app studios to help them scale. One of the things we do a lot is we care about financial literacy within UA teams, within founders, and even sort of when we have CFOs as well. So we invest a lot of time and effort in providing tools and content and calculators to help people really understand the financial dynamic of their ad spend. And then generally, despite the name, we're not actually a venture capital fund, but we typically invest alongside VCs. So it's basically around, you have your debt, you have your equity for building your games, etc., and then you have your debt to scale them. So I'm going to start with this. People are always talking about their ROI or their ROAS specifically. And our view is basically it's a meaningless metric unless you give it some context relating to time. So very often you may hear, yeah, my game achieves 130% ROAS or whatever, and everyone's focused on the number and doesn't really focus on the time. So 130% ROAS is, might be great, right? But the question is that 130% in a week, a month, 6 months, or a year, right? So unless you give it the context of time, it's kind of irrelevant. So, okay, this graph, no stranger to anyone. So from a P&L point of view, you're underwater until you reach ROAS break even. Everyone's always focused on 100% ROAS as a thing, but should remember that 100% ROAS is only the point that you've actually made enough money to pay for the ads. And the thing you should really be focused on is what happens beyond that. So the rest of the journey towards LTV. So let's back up a little bit and think about the different spectrums, right? So we know that time is important. Let's look at like the different spectrum of games. And again, I just pulled some very rough numbers, right? So hyper casual games, you may break even on day 5 and you may have a day 30 ROAS of 120%. You've made 20% in a month. Then you look at a mid-core where maybe you're breaking even after 3 months. And that's giving us 140% ROAS after a year. Next, on to merge and puzzle. Maybe this is argue a little bit generous. 270-day break-even point, but you're going to make a 60% return over 2 years. And then you've got social casino right at the end, whose numbers just never cease to amaze me in terms of how long people still play for. They had to be there on the spectrum, right? So the thing we're really doing here is we're focusing on how long it takes to recover, not how long it takes to just get ROAS positive, but how long it actually takes to recover, the ultimate LTV. So what we're going to be talking about is something that we look at a lot internally when we're working with studios to evaluate kind of how much capital they could need to scale, and also the metrics of like, does it make sense to use external leverage to help scale a game. So we're gonna name this monthly return on investment. You could say it's monthly ROAS, but the point is it's a monthly metric, which is going to give us some ability to make more informed comparisons. Maybe I have 5 or 6 UA opportunities competing for the same dollar, which is going to get the dollar. So we're going to go back to our hyper casual example. Super quick, snackable, short. 20 cents, I'm breaking even by jamming this thing full of ads after 5 days. People are tailing off pretty quickly, but I make a 4-cent profit. I turn 20 cents into 24 cents. Doesn't sound like a lot, but I'm doing it after 30 days. So on an absolute return basis, I'm making a 20% monthly ROI on that ad spend. If you then move forward to kind of mid-core, all the timescales get kind of pushed out. So you're looking at a day 90 break even, but we're going to make, we're going to get our return by the time the LTV curve flattens so far that we don't care anymore. It's going to take a year. So we make $1.20 in profit, but you put that over the $3 CAC, and it's basically a monthly. It's a lifetime. It's a 1-year ROI of 40%, which sounds pretty cool. But then you break it down to a monthly, and it's only 3.3%. You go a little bit further out in genre. So this time is a $5 acquisition cost, breaking even after 270 days. But hey, it's making an $8 return. So I'm making a 60% lifetime ROI. But on a monthly basis, by the time I take that monthly return over 2 years, it's down to like 2.5% per month. So numbers, everyone's like super excited about long genre LTV games, and that's where the money is, and that's where the LTV and that's where the M&A activity is, which may be true in terms of like long-term capital, long-term cash generation, but on a monthly return basis, they're actually like they're much smaller. So here then, just to lay them all out together, your short duration LTV, can actually be really high, but it can tail off pretty quickly. I haven't even bothered with social casino though. So the other thing, I'm not going to get super deep on this, but just to highlight, the shape of the curve makes a difference, right? If you're doing, these calculations that I just went through were straight line calculations. They assume totally incorrectly that there is that the journey is linear, right? So you make 3.5% per month. Of course you don't. So depending on what kind of game you have, there's an element of convexity to the LTV curve, just a fancy word saying what shape is the curve. So if you look at this curve here, what's actually happening is you're earning relatively quickly, and then it flattens off, and then it goes on. So that for you guys is actually really good. That works in your favor, because the more you're earning more quickly, you can make that money work back for you. You can take that money, you can reinvest it. So so you're looking for things within the games where you can get these events that are getting people to spend early on, and the more convex the curve, the better in the short days. It's impossible to model here because everyone's curve is different. So I'm just saying, treat it as a factor, or at least don't forget about it. We may, I know we're running a bit behind, but we may have a look at some tools for modeling this stuff if we have time at the end. But urge everyone to look on our website. So website is pollen.vc. Under pollen.vc, there's a section called calculators, and there's one in particular for modeling ROAS, LTV, and cash flow. So what this is doing is it's helping you build curves. And this LTV curve with the ROAS point is just an investment equation. So it's like how much in, when do I break even, and how much out? And as part of that, you can there's a tab on the top right which shows basically it breaks everything down to a monthly return. If we have time, maybe we can look at it. If not, pollen.vc calculators, check it out. Excuse me. So how to calculate a monthly ROI calculation? So super simple. All you're doing is you're taking your profit on the transaction, which is just taking the CAC away, or whatever CPA metric you're using from the expected lifetime value. What you're then trying to do is to break that down into a lifetime return, either ROAS or ROI. I use them almost interchangeably. Figuring out what the financial return is over that single shot lifetime value of that particular user, and just do that by taking the profit and divide it by what you paid for the user. Now the monthly ROI, all you're doing, so now you've got a return. It may be over 90 days or 150 days or 277 days, or however you think about it. Then we're going to basically just divide it by the number of days and multiply it by 30. So again, because the convexity issue, it is not perfect, but it's going to give you a pretty good kind of idea of like the running yield, if you like, of your cohorts. Now, excuse me, now onto the kind of economics of it. So you look at basically, and this is all about sort of thinking, what type of games do you want to build? Now, maybe you've already built them and you're on a certain path, but if you had the luxury of being able to look at basically what type of games you want to build, then you got to think about the kind of economic parameters and also the investment appetite to invest in different sorts of game genres. So let's go back to our hyper casual example. You can make a 20% monthly return, great, but you need to have a stream of new hits every week, every month coming up that can do that. So it's very, very hard to do. That's why very few hyper casual studios themselves are successful. Of course, you have hyper casual publishers, and they have a stream of cannon fodder studios from all over the world to pump them out. But obviously, the world is moving away from hyper casual. It's just this constant treadmill. Although the returns on a monthly basis can be very good. Then you look at the other end of the spectrum, your puzzle games, merge games, long LTV games. Everyone, particularly the last 2 years, got really excited about long LTV games. The issue is that they're super expensive to scale, because if you're not breaking even till 270 days, 360 days, 400-day break even, it's very difficult to predict. And if you want to do any level of scale, it requires a hell of a lot of money to do so. So investors at the moment, gaming investors, there's very little going on beyond seed and Series A. There's a little bit, there's those sectors are still active, but reading the headlines of raising $50 million to scale a puzzle game, whatever, those days are very, very much over. So there's much less appetite, and everyone's looking for more certainty, and it's basically like getting to somewhere in the middle. So on that, basically, there's different appetites, there's different genres. I couldn't resist this, and just a reason to get my Apple Pencil out. But it's like, hyper casual is like, not good for the soul. It's just too much of a treadmill. Long LTV games, you're just waiting for too long before you get an outcome. So what we're thinking about is some sort of duration, and obviously it depends on the duration of games that you make, and appetite, and also capital appetite to actually scale as well. So you're really looking for your just right. And then just to articulate it, just think of those long LTV games that you think the metrics are good, you're projecting everything out, it all looks good, but you got to figure out how you're going to fund it, and that is typically with someone else's money, whether that be through debt or with equity. So again, just one conversation we had recently was like, hey, we want to use debt to scale our user acquisition. I'm like, great, super, preaching to the choir. And they wanted to spend $100,000 per day. That was what they thought they needed to do to get like a proper level of scale. They had a projected break-even date of 270 days. They hadn't actually been through one cycle yet, but off a few months of data, they projected this was where the party was going to start. And they were looking at how they were going to fund it, and they want to fund it through debt. Unfortunately, that was never going to happen. When you look at it this way, you want to spend $27 million before your first cohort is even projected to break even. Just not going to happen. Now, it has been happening. People would take these projections and they would raise tens of millions of dollars from VCs who just raised massive funds and had to deploy capital. Let's see how it works out for them. But it's a really capital-intensive business scaling those sorts of games. Of course, if you look at how games can get funded, so you have VCs, and they're still really active actually. Market in seed and less so around Series A, but there's lots of new money going to gaming. That's good. There is factoring. There's revenue-based loans. Revenue-based loans, particularly, factoring is a bit different. There are a few companies now that are saying, hey, we'll give you money, or lend you money, you put it into UA, and we'll take a skim of your revenues until we've been repaid. Typically, it's on a term basis. I really don't understand. We've been doing this for 8 years. I don't understand how term loans really work to scale user acquisition. A one-shot loan versus something you can keep drawing on as you need to scale. Some banks can just about get their heads around it, but it's very paper-based, it's very manual, and it's always like a month in arrears at least. There's obviously publishers. People will, say, I need to go to a publisher to scale my game. And obviously it depends very much on the type of studio you are, what you want to build. We ran some research, or we analyzed some publicly available data last year that we wanted to ask what was the primary business model of every studio that had been sold in the previous 12 months. 83% was self-published, 15% were themselves publishers, and only 2% of studios that got acquired relied on a third party to get their games to market. So if you ever want to sell your company, you need to figure out self-publishing or buy in the bits that you don't have. And then there's non-bank revolving credit, which is fancy name for what we do. So we basically look at two things every day. We look at the amount of money that's trapped up in receivables, and then we also estimate residual cohort value. So how much is trapped in your existing users yet to monetize? And we do some kind of fancy math, and we bake that into a credit line where you can draw as much or as little as you want on a revolving basis, bit like a secured overdraft that is re-verified daily. So finish that. I was thinking about this I was in Cyprus last week, and thinking about comparing mobile gaming to farming. So in this scenario, we're farming salad greens, right? We're kind of very, very short duration. This is the hyper casual of farming, right? So we're going to plant the seed, and we're going to take the crop to market in 7 days, and it requires a little bit of water to start it off. What can possibly go wrong in 7 days, right? We could have the hydroponics fail, and the crop doesn't yield. Okay, fine. It's all short duration, short outcomes. Then at the other end of the spectrum, we're sugarcane farmers, right? So we're investing a load of money, and we'd expect to take this crop to harvest after a year. Now, we can do all these things within our control, but sometimes there are things just completely out with your control. The best projections, all the rest of it. There could be drought, flood, disease, war, any of these things. And the other thing is, those sorts of crops require a lot of fertilizer and a lot of nourishment and upfront investment. Now, you might get a huge return from that, but there's a lot of things that can blow you off course. So the takeaway really is, now maybe you've already planted your crop, in which case this doesn't apply. But when thinking about it, like, what sort of gaming studio do you want to build? What, do you really want to go for it with a $50 million round and the big, puzzle game, whatever, that's got super long duration? Maybe you do. Maybe you just want to make snackable games and with high returns and think you can keep knocking them out. Or most likely you're going to find some kind of middle ground that kind of works for you. Deciding what you want to do. The one thing we see a lot of is, people you're in a merge game, whatever, and you're somewhere between 9 and 12 month break even. But you're trying to hit some sort of unrealistic benchmark, like, hey, I'm trying to break even in 3 months when everyone else is breaking even in 9. So I think look to the benchmarks for what people are paying, what retention looks like, and so on, and set realistic benchmarks internally. And then, of course, when you're thinking about your overall business and how you finance it and how you want to grow it, don't just focus on the headline metric. Look through the metric into this sort of monthly metric, so you have this idea of a yield or a return on capital, and then figure out the best way to do that. If you're going to do something that's going to give you, if you think about an investor's offered a 1% per month return on capital. So that's what, 12% without compounding it. Maybe they think, I'm going to put 12, I can get 12% somewhere else in some other form of investment that's not mobile user acquisition, because there's a lot of risk to deliver that 12%. If you say it's 100% a year, maybe different. I'm going to take a much more of a risk appetite to that. So just think about it, just put your investor hat on and look at the yield that the user acquisition is getting you. And then obviously, keep testing the investor climate. Is lots of money being invested by VCs? Should you be looking at different options and figure out what your optimal kind of mix of capital is like? Some of that is just going to be seasonal, because there's it's the ebbs and flows of the market. But I think if you're armed with these metrics, you're going to be well placed to make some sort of informed decisions. Marius, how are we doing on time? I shall do a very, very quick, just so you've got some context of what I was talking about. So if I full screen this. So what I was going to show you here is just an example of the tools that we built here. So this is ROAS, LTV, and cash flow. So what we're trying to get to is this investment equation. I want to know how much in, when do I break even, how much out. So text is pretty small here, but you've got basically a retention curve. You can put different retention metrics, ARPDAU, acquisition costs, cash, there's a few other inputs down the left, and also if you have a financing cost as well. And this is all totally configurable. So I can, for example, input 4 points in my day 7 retention. What's that going to do to my overall investment equation? It's going to keep going dynamically. Once I've got that, I need to take into account, who's going to pay who's going to pay out when. So once I've got that, I can model the cash flows. So if I take my marketing budget and I spend it as wisely as I can, and I'm waiting till I'm being paid by the platforms and reinvesting it, I'm the red line. And guess what? If you're borrowing against something that is ROI positive and you're able to double down and reinvest faster, then if you're using a revolving credit facility, you're the top line. Looking at this behind, if I look at the stats on this one, what I'm doing is I'm just looking at an investment equation. So my $1.20 is breaking even day 28. I go on to make a $2.05 LTV after 103 days, which is a lifetime ROI of 70%. So if I look at it on a monthly basis, I'm taking it down to 20.5%. Now, so we've got a machine that we can put $1 and get $1.20.5 repeatedly that we think we can scale. If you have to borrow the money to put into it, so let's say that costs you 1.5% for the month, you always have to compare on an apples with apples basis. You're then investing it on your ad spend at 20.5. You're making an adjusted return of 19% on the ad spend after paying for the financing costs. Another way to think about it, for every $1 you're spending in interest, you're making $12.67 or thereabouts. So we built these tools as of course for kind of for our own purposes and helping people model those scenarios. But the biggest thing, and people use these, we've had them out for like 4 years for just using and trying out metrics for free-to-play games. And then helping model those financial scenarios and outcomes on the back of it. So they're a totally free resource. Don't even require an email. Well, actually, may require an email address, but we don't verify it. So no need to share data. It's a sandbox for everyone to learn from.
I think we have time for like maybe 1-2 questions. Are there any questions to Martin? Oh.
Just a short question regarding this tool, if you can get it back. Yeah, here.
Right.
Okay, it doesn't say anything about your daily budget limit. Not like when you're limited by money, but when you're limited by the ad network. Like you can maintain $1 CPI until you're spending, let's say, 2K per day. But after that, it's not coming. How do you put that into this equation?
So it's very hard to do that because obviously the acquisition costs are going to rise. But it's all down to the addressable market and the shape of it. It's effectively just a demand and supply curve. So you don't know how quickly those costs is going to spike. So in there, we actually dampen them down. We put some measure of like, you can't just keep and scale this forever. But and again, it's only intended to be like a high-level tools to figure out the metrics. So yeah, acquisition costs rising, you have a smaller addressable market. Mathematically, they're just going to go up quicker. Whereas you've got a huge addressable market like a hyper casual, you might be able to up your bid by 2 cents and reach another 10 million people or something. So it's basically all about demand and supply curves. We've got some video content on that as well that explains it.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you very much, Martin. Again, and then we have today's last presentation. Last but not least, of course. So let's invite to the stage Joseph. Did I pronounce it correctly? Who will be talking